My name is Keith Ellison. I'm your Attorney General here in the state of Minnesota. What I'd like to do is ask our panel to sort of offer some off-the-cuff reflections, candid kind of reflections, talk about their work a little bit, and then I got a few questions for them, and then we'll get it right to you. Plan? All right. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, let's hear that. So why don't we just go through an introduction with a few reflections, and then we'll get to some questions, and we'll get to the audience. Let me just start with you, Jerry.
Jerry Blackwell, lawyer here in town. Both of my parents are from the South, same as Keith, South Carolina and Georgia. Was just down at the Equal Justice Institute in Montgomery about 2 weeks ago. And it's just incredible. When I watch the film, it's hard to really define the words for the spirit, the compassion, the conviction that Bryan Stevenson had to stand up in the face of that kind of injustice and inequity. And frankly, it makes me think I should do something different more as a lawyer myself.
Well, let me just say, Jerry's a little bit modest. He is one of the finest trial lawyers in the state of Minnesota. That's absolutely true. Many of you know that directly. But not only that, he hasn't been satisfied with just being successful in the courtroom. He's actually making major investments of time and resources into bringing the story of the Duluth lynching to light. He's doing that right now. So thank you, Jerry, for that work.
Thank you, Keith.
Next, let me introduce Andre Cymone, the great Andre Cymone. Let's hear it up for our own, Minnesota's own, Andre Cymone. And Andre, many of you know him as a gifted musician, and he certainly is that. But I want you to know that Andre comes from a justice family. His mother, Bernadette Anderson, fought for justice on the north side for people. Who remembers Bernadette Anderson? Yeah, put your hands together for Bernadette. She was awesome. But Andre's brother and I, Sonny Anderson, worked together for years and years at the Legal Rights Center. And Sonny was the real beating heart of the Legal Rights Center as he investigated cases day after day after day, fighting for justice for people. Andre, any reflections you want to share with us?
You know, that was a powerful movie, first of all, and foremost. I think what it shows is, and first I have to say that for people like myself, artists, entertainers, I think if you have any kind of a platform, you need to speak out. Because we're in a place now where people have to get involved. You have to get involved in your community. Because I think a lot of people don't understand what's going on. Right. You know, I think they don't understand what the process is, the system is. You know, and you see that, and that's a system of injustice. Yep. You know, and so I just, you know, I think a lot of communities in this city are uncomfortable with black culture. You know, and they think black culture is intense, and it is. But you got to ask yourself why. And with a movie like that, you see why black culture is so intense, and people want to carve out places where they gentrify, you know, and you know, change communities and try to get people to go that way, and so they can have a life that suits their personal taste. And things that are uncomfortable, they want to put that somewhere else. You know, you can't do that. You can't run from evolution.
That's right, bro.
You can't do that. So I just want to say, I mean, it was a great, powerful movie. It touched me. And, you know, you were saying your families are from the South. My family's from here.
Yeah.
You know, my mother's from Minneapolis. My father's from Fergus Falls.
Fergus Falls.
You know, our family has been here for a long time. And, you know, it is. I mean, and I take pride in that because, you know, I think a lot of times, you know, when you were born and raised in Minneapolis, amongst everybody, you've seen this evolution. You've seen these changes. You've seen people come from different places, you know, and try to acclimate, you know, and you know, it's just interesting for me. I mean, because I live in California right now, so it's even more of a stark reality when you go back and you go to a big city like that, then you come back to the Twin Cities. And you see how much it either has changed or it's devolved as opposed to evolved. You know. That's my word. No, absolutely. And I want to say, if you have it in your heart, I want you to just recognize who just spoke up. That's Philando Castile's mother. Okay? So we need to say a prayer, and I do. And one of the songs on my album was based off of a situation that happened here in my hometown, that makes no sense. Okay? I'm going to pass it on.
Thank you. And Valerie, thank you for coming. I got to get a new prescription because I didn't see you back there. But Valerie Castile, everybody, look, let me just tell you, Valerie, nobody would blame Valerie if she just grieved the loss of her boy. But she has not stopped grieving like any mother would be allowed to. She has gotten on the forefront of justice and has been out there speaking out. Valerie Castile, everybody, thank you very much. Now we got Rena Moran, Representative Moran, who is always fighting for justice in the state legislature, on the front, and when it comes to foster care, when it comes to criminal justice reform, when it comes to all these matters that affect us so much. Rena, give us a few of your initial impressions.
So good evening, everyone. So I moved from the first seat to the third seat, so I'm still trying to recover, right? Because the movie is filled with so much emotions. And from a black mother, the injustices that we see and feel are just so real and so heavy. And so I take that away. I take the way of looking at Johnny D and realizing that there are so many Johnny Ds. That is kind of like our history in America. That is that history, right? And to see it played out and to see all the injustices and unfairness and just to see someone railroaded who has a family, who is a black man, who is a father, who is a husband. It just filled me with so many emotions. And, here we are in 2020, realizing that we still have so much that we must do to ensure that we have justice now. To my sister Valerie Castile, we continue to work on that justice, the justice for Philando, the justice for you, the justice for his family, right? But there are so many places where we have to continue to stand up and be brave, because it's hard, it's emotional, it's tiresome, and we was able to see all of that within that movie. And so we have work to do, and I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rena. I got one for you in a little while. Let's hear it for Rena Moran, everyone. Trea, thank you for being here. Thank you for representing Ujamaa Man.
Yeah, thank you.
Ujamaa Man all over the world. Let's hear it from her. Now, Trea, you got to hold it up for the youth, man. What'd you think about this movie?
Like they said, it was very powerful. I would say it definitely put me in a different perspective of like how everything is, because I'm still young, and still like understanding everything. I already know like the justice system is not really fit for us. It's always like abided by people not as colorful as us, I guess you could say, or cultural, so like being able to like see him like continuously fighting for him, it was powerful. Like to me, it's like me fighting for myself, because I see myself in that reflection, and it's something that you can't just let go so easily. When you fighting for yourself, it's like a never-ending battle. It's always a space for change. And I ain't gonna lie, I was over here crying hard when Herb was up there getting that was a tough scene, because it's like I want to be in that position where I'm helping for my people as well, and it was really tough to like really see in that perspective, because it's like I can't really do too much at this time, but like that still fueled me to I can always help the next person. Like when I get to that point in life, when I make that money, when I make that step, you know, I want to be able to be that person when I'm like, okay, yeah, like I can bring this to light. Yeah.
That's right. You were inspired.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Trea, everybody. So my first question, Andre, is for you. Just Mercy is ultimately a piece of art. It's a work of art. It's a film. And I'm curious about your thoughts as an artist. You know, what is the call for artists today? What should artists, whether they be musicians, screenwriters, filmmakers, I don't know, dancers, rappers, what is the call for the artist in the face of an unjust situation? Understanding that, you know, artists can inspire and provoke action in a way that, quite frankly, politicians never could dream to. What is the call for the artist?
There's so many calls. I mean, first of all, let's start with some of the things that I'm participating in, and that's, you know, coming back to your community, getting involved, speaking to young kids, and if you've got the financial ability to, you know, put back into some of these systems that the system took out of the schools that initially had programs for music, programs for art, and things of that made, I think people like myself and like Prince, that's how we were able to be successful.
Sure.
Because there were music programs that, you know, a lot of schools don't exist now. So in essence, if you were dealing with what's going on right now, there would be no me, there would be no Prince, there would be no Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, and whatever revenue they bring into the IRS in Minneapolis wouldn't exist.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, so you're dealing with that. The other thing is, I think as artists, you have to reach outside of yourself, and you look at films that are, I guess, culturally motivating. You know, and you think of the films that define culture, like Boys in the Hood or Juice or Menace to Society, and you see what they, you know, what they brought to a community. Sometimes, and that's great if there are other films to sort of combat that, you know, but they're basically so often are not. So all young kids have to look forward to, and their heroes and people that they look up to, you know, are unfortunately and paid by companies to go out and, you know, make these movies that put those images
Sure.
out in the community. So my you know, message to artists are, make some Harry Potter films. you know, make Lord of the Rings. Make, you know, if it's fantasy, whatever, or even if it's like the story from my family, coming from Fergus Falls, and understanding, you know, what that entailed. And because every movie doesn't have to be a movie of tragedy. Doesn't have to be a movie of overcoming, you know, these unbelievable odds that we know that we're going to have to do. But making other films, making other things that say other things, and that give our kids other heroes, other people to look up to. You know, I mean, you know, I'm a musician. You know, maybe some people look up to me. That's wonderful if they do. And you know, I mean, obviously, you know, I'm being humble because, you know, I'm made aware pretty constantly that people look up to me, and that's a wonderful thing. But it's just not about me. I'm not one of those kind of people. I'm not driven by ego. I could care less.
All I know is the last time I heard you up on stage, you were playing Get Up, Stand Up for Your Rights.
Where was that at?
That was at the Bernie Sanders rally.
Thank you.
But you also wrote a song about voting. Remember that? You remember you wrote the Vote song? That was a rocking tune right there, man.
I updated it. You know?
Oh, I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah, oh no. Vote. If you don't vote, you don't count.
Yeah.
If you don't count, you can't complain.
That's right.
You know, so yeah, no, I think we have to get involved. I've always tried to get, you know, people that do what I do to get involved, you know, because you can't really complain about something if you're not doing what you got to do to make a change.
Well, you're leading by example, brother, really. So, Jerry, you know, the Duluth lynching was 100 years ago. Why should we remember in this 100th anniversary this year, this tragic incident? What lessons does it have for us? And why have you been on the forefront of trying to bring a pardon on behalf of Max Mason, who wasn't lynched but was wrongfully convicted back so many years ago in connection with that tragedy that occurred in Duluth? Why is this something that we need to deal with right now? And can you tie it into just mercy?
Let me first just make sure everybody knows what happened and what we refer to as the Duluth lynching. On June 15th of 1920, there was a circus that was traveling through Duluth. There was a young white woman who claimed that she was gang raped by a number of the members of the circus, all young black men in the early 20s. There were 3 of the black men who were jailed in Duluth, and on that particular night, 10,000 Duluth residents gathered. Now, it's a town then of only roughly 50,000. 10,000 showed up for what they call the necktie party, and engaged in what's referred to as an exhibition lynching. That means it was an exhibition. They all showed up to watch it. People took pictures, smiling, grinning, brought kids, and so on. They broke into the jail, dragged out the 3 African American men, tortured them, murdered them, right on the downtown Duluth off a lamppost. Then they posed for photographs and made postcards of it. There were a couple of other black men who had been taken to a different town, so they weren't lynched. But if you get this, there were 10,000 witnesses to this, and not one person was charged with the murder or the lynching, although there were 10,000 witnesses to it. The only person who was charged and convicted of anything was another black man. His name was Max Mason, who was charged, tried, and convicted of the rape that didn't occur, and was sentenced to 7 to 30 years in prison. And so he served 4 years in the Stillwater prison before the trial judge who oversaw the case sought to intercede to have him paroled because he never felt the evidence was strong enough to have convicted the man in the first place. Now, why didn't the judge take the case away? There are all kinds of questions about rule of law in this. So he was then released from the prison after having served several years on the condition that he never returned to the state of Minnesota. Although he was it's widely accepted that this was a fictitious, made-up, non-existent rape. So we are seeking a pardon of Max Mason before the pardon board, and have already gotten through the first rung and the first step of that. The first time anybody would have sought a posthumous pardon for anyone in the state of Minnesota, so that's somewhat of a challenge. Max Mason had sought a pardon at the time and was turned down by the pardon board. So we had to essentially get leave even to seek this pardon from the pardon board, which General Ellison is a member of, as is Governor Walz and Chief Justice Gilday from the Supreme Court. So our next step was going to be to submit the full pardon application by January 17. So this has everything to do with issues of equal justice, issues of rules of law, and for me, I take it all back to slavery. And if you get nothing else from anything I say tonight, is to understand the relevance of the Duluth lynching, just mercy, how all of this relates back to things that emanate from the period known as slavery. And I'm not just talking about the gnarly, iniquitous, ugly tree that was enslaving people, the torture, the rape, the murder, etc. I'm talking about the roots of it, from which this ugly tree grew. Those roots had never been dug up. They've never been killed. They have managed to bear strange fruit in every single generation. And so I want to talk a little bit about what those iniquitous roots are like when somebody says and asks you the question, what does slavery have to do with me? Mitch McConnell asked some question like that not so long ago.
That's right.
And so I want you to have an answer kind of for them that's strictly Americana. But first, let me just, a couple of factoids, just kind of putting on your school hats a minute that I just jotted down, that black people in the U.S. are 6.4 times more likely than whites to be incarcerated. They can expect to die. We can expect to die. I can expect to die 3.5 years sooner than a white person. 1 in 3 black male babies born that were born in the last century could be expected to be incarcerated. Black men are 8 times more likely to be killed by police than whites. And so these kinds of disparities have always been there. But But here are like 4 of those roots when I talk about where this all comes from. And number 1 is the sense and run the rubric of white supremacy that there's a right to exploit persons of African descent to benefit whites economically or politically. The sense of entitlement of unequal rights as between blacks and whites. And that shows up not only, as we know, in enslaving people and the 3/5 compromise that was baked right into the Constitution, but you can bring a lot of this stuff forward today and look at what we see even today. When we see the disparities that exist, whether it's in the mass incarcerations that we see today, I don't think anybody doubts for 1 second that if we knew that 1 in 3 whites were likely to be put into prison for just being white in America and being born here, that the entire democratic experience in America would end in about 14 days, were that the case. But we see the mass incarcerations, the healthcare disparities, voter suppression and gerrymandering are another way of attempting to control. And then the whole issue of the redlining that took place, that first creating the so-called black ghettos, and then underinvesting in them, and then blaming the people who live there for them, which still kind of goes on today, and versions of convict leasing. My family was enslaved on a plantation in northeast Georgia, in Hartwell, Georgia, which for some who think slavery ended in 1865, there was still slavery being practiced there into the 20th century. Hundreds of people were enslaved in Hartwell and across the river in Anderson, South Carolina. And you can read the biography of one of those, Robert Sadler, where he talks about what that experience was like. Daddy grew up as a sharecropper there and talked about there were people up on horses having to pick cotton, and some of them, he says, were slaves, and read about them. So the whole issue of sharecropping, convict leasing, the whole peonage system where you had these vague laws that are created for rounding up overwhelmingly black men and then leasing them out to private corporations for money. And the corporations would then take out insurance policies on them so that in the event they work them to death, then the corporations get paid, not the families. And so this is another part of history not told, but anyhow, this convict leasing takes place even today with the mass incarceration that takes place. So you got the economic exploitation. Another one of the ugly roots is the use of just abject violence. The belief that you have the right to mete out this kind of violence on people of African descent, overwhelmingly men. And again, that goes back not just from lynchings, but we see it all the time in the white police violence and then the rate of the acquittals and the disparities, the absolute harshness, the lack of empathy at every stage from arrest to charging to convictions and then even to sentencing. And we all know about the disparities between what we saw on the war on drugs in the black community, and we compare that to opioids and meth simply being a health crisis that needs a health reform. But it has its roots going back hundreds of years to roots that informed enslaving people. So just one more. And it is the creation of what I would call myths, normalizing myths, to make things that are abnormal, unusual, wrong, seem normal. The race and racism you see in the newspaper every single day in one form or another, but it's so commonplace that you almost don't even see it because it is so common. But it's the numb sensibilities. They create these myths, whether it is the happy slave that we all knew about, separate but equal was a myth, manifest destiny, I was taught in school, as a good student too, so I knew how to say that it was God's will that America should span from coast to coast, and that justified what happened to the indigenous folks and whose lands were taken and whose lives were taken and whose land was taken. Colorblind meritocracy and black on black crime is raised as one of these myths to excuse forms of white racism. And ones I hear now all the time, similar myths, is the myth of denial. It's always understood you're supposed to deny. Deny that the Civil War was fought for slavery. Deny that even statements like, from our president to the 4 congresswomen of color, go back to the crime-infested place from which you came. Then he turned around and said, there's not a racist bone in my body. Obama, go back to Kenya or wherever, said the Republican from North Carolina, and then he turned around and says, there's not a racist bone in my body, because it's understood to deny. And that's part of the mythifying that takes place, the ideologies that propel and justify and excuse and desensitize around the racism that takes place and that takes lives, and that helps to inform how it is that you can have black robes and what you call white justice, what I call white justice in many instances. So bringing this full circle around to the very simple question you asked. How does all this inform? It is because it is all sort of, to me, the strange fruits from the very same roots. And those roots informed the enslavement of people. Those roots informed the mass violence that took place in Duluth, where 10,000 citizens got together to murder 3 men and then to take one man's life away. Max Mason, by the way, sentenced to 7 to 30 years in prison, was 21 at the time. You know, if he had served 30 years, he had gotten out at 52, but he died at 42, right? That would have been a life sentence for Max Mason. And so we're trying to do justice and do right by him. So to me, these events that happened in the past have everything to do with our current patterns of race relations today. They have to do with understanding how it is people relate one to the other today. You don't really even have to know the history, because the truth of the history is how you relate to each other. And because I learned all kinds of, to me, lies of history, some of which was to me deliberately sort of propaganda that was designed to have me to think a thing about myself, my country, my relationship to it, and I was simply being indoctrinated in certain ways, in ways that was referred to as education. But it really wasn't. If you knew in North Carolina what I learned about the Civil War and various things. So I'll stop with that.
Did they call it the War of Northern Aggression?
It was the War of Northern Aggression, obviously, and John Brown was the craziest man.
Oh, yeah.
You ever saw. He was going one way and the beard was going the other one,
Sure.
always, because who else would be fighting against enslaving people?
So,
So Keith, that.
well, I appreciate that. That was a fulsome answer, my friend. Trey, let me just get Trey in this little conference. So, Trey, you know, you're how old are you now? 2019? What? Sorry, man. Forgive me.
I appreciate that. I'm 25. Though.
Okay, 25. Good. You look great. My question to you is this. Talk to us a little bit about what you believe your generation's call is. A little similar to what I asked Andre. Your generation is being handed a baton. You all are being asked to pick up the mantle of equal justice, of liberty and justice for all. How do you feel you guys are doing? And what would you say to all of us who might be in a generation ahead of you and to your peers?
I would say for our generations, we're fighting the war kind of differently than generations before us. We're trying to fight it in a way because I'm actually an artist as well.
Okay,
so
good.
I do a lot of business with a lot of colored individuals, blacks, Asians, whites, and then we trying to build our community in a way where everybody's just making money, because statistically speaking, we don't really fluctuate our money in our community that too well. So we're trying to build a foundation where we're able to have that
Build prosperity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So being able to do that as well, and then people are fighting in different ways as well. So that's a plus, because I know people that's also in the political field as well that's speaking upon the same thing as what was happening in the movie. And then, you know, as an artist, I like to speak upon what things are happening in my view, and take notice to people that's watching what I'm doing. So being able to have that platform, showing what I feel like is important to my people and what's going around in the world, because I mean we have a lot of stuff that we need to get done ourselves as individuals and as a community, because I mean we're behind, not by ourselves, not by choice, but by what happened to us and our ancestors. And like in slavery, you know, we weren't trying to be separate. You know, we was always a unit, you know, since way back then. And I'm starting to see that, because I'm actually from the South too. My parents is from 7th Ward in Louisiana, and my mom is from Marrero, from New Orleans. So I have a different cultural background than it is in Minnesota, and I'm starting to see that unravel here as well, and then really seeing the differences of how everybody like participate with each other and how we really engaging with each other. Like it's all love now, you know. Before it was just like, you know, we would have our heads down, we won't really speak, but now it's like everybody have their heads lifted up, and we're moving forward. You know, we want to be able to have something that we leave for our generations. We're not thinking about what's happening the next day. We're thinking about the future 5, 10 years in advance. You know, instead of just waiting for other people to give us something, we're actually out here trying to get it ourselves.
Thank you. So, Rena, let's give a hand to Trea, everybody. So, Rena, the legislative session's coming up pretty soon. And is justice on the agenda in this upcoming session? And what advice can you give all of us to be more involved to help shape laws about our state? As a person who's in the state legislature, really effective legislator, a committee chair, what advice do you have for us about how to get involved and make a difference?
So, so let me just share with you a little bit about me. So I am in my 5th term in the House of Representatives, right? Which means I'm going into my 10th year this year, yay. Times go so fast. I'm also the chair of Health and Human Service Policy Committee. But for many years, I was also the only black legislator in a body of 134 legislators. Right? I said only, right? I was elected in 2010 as the first African American to represent St. Paul in the legislature in 2010. And before I go any further, I just want to recognize my county commissioner over there, Tony Carter, and her husband, Melvin Carter. Second. And so I mention all that because history is important, right? And my journey to the House of Representatives is a journey. I am also a mother of 7. I have 4 black sons, right, and 3 daughters. And I mention that because I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. That's right, clap there. And in 2000, I came here to the state of Minnesota. And I came here for many different reasons, mostly to Minnesota, because I'm from Chicago, you know, we really don't think about cold weather in Minnesota, all right? But I had heard that the state of Minnesota had one of the best educational systems. And that was important to me, right? That was important. And so I came here, didn't make really good decision or think it through really, really good, was homeless for 4 months before I found housing in St. Paul. 5 years later, I was buying a home in the same community in St. Paul, in the Rondo community that I first came to. And what I found and what came with that, through that journey of coming from Chicago homeless to Minnesota, not knowing any of the culture or the history of Minnesota, was that I was raised in a community where community was important. I was raised in a community where we was connected to each other. I was raised in a community where family was important and is important. And that is what I brought here to a state that I knew nothing about, was connecting to other people, connecting to your neighbor. You know, I did not want to be the only one to raise my 7 kids or my 4 black sons. I wanted it to be okay if someone saw my children doing something, that they would be okay to knock on my door and say to me, Miss Rena, I see Javon doing so-and-so. That's the kind of community that I was raised up in, where we took care of each other. And I think today, that is still so important, because life is not just about me and yourself. It's about being connected to other people, because injustices are still real today in the 21st century. And the only way we can connect to those injustices is by being connected to other people and to create a movement where we are looking for justice, where we are looking for fairness, where we are looking for equity, where we're just looking for a little equity and justice and fairness. And so when I was a resident in St. Paul, and I bought my home, and I saw when the light rail came through, so this was my part of activism, right? And knowing that the light rail's coming through, and I thought to myself, I just bought a home that I believe that I can afford in the community that I love, and I am going to be taxed out of my home because redevelopment is happening. And what I found from being in that community and what I found from being in the Rondo community, that the Rondo community has so much in common with the community that I grew up with. But some reason when I came to Minnesota, I connected with the reasoning that the injustices that happen with the Rondo community by the state coming in and taking that community, you know,
Through the freeway.
through the freeway, you know, they built 94 right through the black community, right? And when I came in 2000, the community people were still upset about that. And what I learned is that they said that I would never allow anything to happen in my community without being at the table, bringing solutions to the table about what my community is going to look like. Because injustices are real. Fairness is not always happening. And we have to be ready and prepared to collectively do this work together. But I also found that I was organizing around this night and the other, and so many other people was organizing too in the Rondo community, which is why I love that community. We're fighters. And one day, it happened to me to say, if I have to continue to fight this fight, how do I really want to fight this fight? Because as I became connected and connected to so many other things, from, you know, a bunch of nonprofits, from a political organization, is that as a black community, we were and we are always fighting for something. And the thing that kept resonating with me, it was like the laws and the policies and the practices continued to keep our people in a place. Whether it was redlining, whether it was the inequities in the school system, the unfairness in our school system, wherever that may be, to me it was really clear that it was policies that somebody was creating that was keeping us in a place, who had the power to make you stay in your place. So I became a legislator. Never thought, I'm not political to this day, right? And never thought I wanted to. I'm not a politician, you guys, right? But I want you to know the importance of community being connected into a political process. Because someone has a worldview that they're bringing to the table around decisions that's going to impact your life. Someone whose worldview may not be connected to your worldview. And often I found myself in the legislature and how I saw solutions or the problems or the issues were different from my colleagues. How I saw the solutions were different from my colleagues, only because my worldview and how I saw the issues that had been impacting our community were different. The solutions were different. And so I say all that because justice and mercy is not a given. It is not a given. And you, and each one of us here, as much as I hear we all say how much I hate politics, that's the first thing I hear mostly especially when I talk to my black sisters and brothers, that we just hate politics, right? It's like, somebody else got to do that. Those things are impacting our lives. And if you don't have to run, but you need to be talking to your legislator. You need to be talking to your county commissioner. You need to be talking to your mayor. You need to be talking to your city council. You need to be talking to them. You have to. Your worldview is important. Your experience. Those who be impacted by issues are those who need to be at the table solving the problems.
Thank you.
Right?
All right,
So-
good. One quick question. So, yeah, let me let you get in, Andre, but I got to ask you this real quick. There is a proposal to cap probation at about 5 years. I hear now that there's a supplemental proposal to flex that out and give judges the authority to change it if it needs to be. Is that going to happen, or what do you know?
So that's the sentencing guideline. The legislature created a sentencing commission, right? And that part of their work was to look at probation caps. I believe we're going to bring that up in 2020. The legislative session starts on February the 11th. It is my hope that, I think the commission has to pass that.
Yeah.
It seems like the community showed up in numbers. That is power and powerful. And I believe because the community did show up, it helps to influence people's decisions.
So is 40 years probation ridiculous or what?
40 years, and we in the state of Minnesota is known for having, low incarceration rates. I wouldn't say low, but lower than some other states, but also very long probations. And so we're looking at they're looking at a 5-year cap for probation, regardless.
Okay. So
that's a hope that.
Thank you.
it
Andre, let's
happens.
let Andre get a word in, then we'll go take a few questions from you, then we'll wrap it up.
All right, I was just going to say one thing to touch on what everybody's kind of been saying.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, really to effectuate the kind of change that has to happen, we have to find something that we can, a common connection. And I think what that is right now in this country, we live in a contract culture, which means these contracts are all around the country that basically make money off Americans without hiring Americans, okay? And so there's a lot going on that people should be made aware of, especially with people who are involved with political, with the political system. People need to understand what that means, because that's what's changing. That connection will bring people together, because it's not about black, white, any other color. It's like, this is happening to this country, period. It's making money off Americans without paying Americans. If that makes sense, that's crazy. And people should understand what that means.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's
all I'm saying.
important. Yes. So let me just tell you, we got time for a few questions from everybody. I'm looking for a hand. Ms. Castile, I saw you first.
You know I got something to say. I'm bringing the mic. Oh, okay. Yeah, I talk loud enough. Y'all can hear me. Y'all know who I am. Since we're on the subject of incarceration and things like that, and Bryan Stevenson being an attorney, I want to know if anything, what is being done with Ramsey County and Hennepin County's public. Oh, Lord have mercy! I be eating the thing. Oh. Well, I wanted to know, as far as Hennepin County and Ramsey County Public Defender's Office, what are you guys doing as far as trying to restructure the engagement between the client and the public defender? Because, the public defenders are referred to as public pretenders. They pretend to care about you, and they pretend to fight for you, but they really don't, because they're being paid by the state. So they don't give all, because they're looking at a sheet of paper that says, okay, you've been arrested for this, that, and the third, and just basically think you're guilty. You're already guilty, but you got to prove your innocence. But I just want to put it on the record of how they're treating Mary Mariotti. She is a supervisor for the Public Defender's Office in Hennepin County. But we just need to get our public defenders to really defend the people they're defending, because they're just saying, okay, you were represented, but you weren't represented in the manner that you would be if you were a paying client. So I just want to know, are you guys retraining the public defenders where there is a human connection, where you know that this is a person, he has a life, he has a family, and he may not be guilty. But if you go in and you have represent this person, of course he's going to be convicted. But I just want to know, are they doing anything to try to retrain the public defenders to actually care about you and want to, do the best that they can? Thank you.
Right. Let me just say to everybody, Commissioner of Corrections Paul Snell is here with us tonight, so please give him a hand. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. And so so as a person up here who used to be a public defender, I'll just say that, as a person who's been a state and federal public defender, I really have to tell you, I don't think that the public defenders, any problems are due to the public defenders being paid by the state. I think where the problem comes in is that you got more cases than you can really handle. You did not paid as much as the prosecutors are. In fact, a lot of public defenders end up having to apply for jobs at the prosecutor's office because they're paid at the same year level significantly more. And so if you want to work in the area of criminal justice, you probably aren't going to be getting paid as much as your prosecutor counterpart who's the same number of years out of law school as you are. And so I won't say that public defenders don't care. I know some awesome public defenders. I also know some people who got way more cases than they could possibly handle and really do need, we need to put more money in the public defense system so that we can lower the caseload and give people the ability to really invest in the cases that they have. And I'm speaking only on my opinion right now. This is just me. I'm not speaking for the Attorney General's office, just myself. I think Mary Moriarty, I've known her for 30 years. She has tremendous amount of integrity, works very hard, does great work training people, and has spoken out against racial injustice, has spoken out against injustice towards undocumented people, and has spoken out for pay parity between public defenders and prosecutors. And there's some people believe that she's in trouble because she did speak out on those issues. Yeah. So she's trying to do a good thing, and I need somebody to prove to me that she's not in trouble for trying to do the right thing. So I'll leave it that right there. Anybody else want to touch that issue, or should we go to another person? Yes, sir, Sergeant Carter. Now, you used to be Melvin Carter Jr., now you're Melvin Carter III's dad. Let's hear it for the Carter family.
Yeah. You have to, can you hear me?
Yeah. Don't worry about it, Melvin, because I'm Jeremiah and Amira's and Elijah's dad nowadays. So.
It feels like a measurement of success. I also have two beautiful daughters in the booth.
That's right.
And I'm Tony Carter's husband. And so
that's your highest honor right there.
It really is. But I'm struck. I want to address a question to the attorney community up there. I'm struck by the fact that there was no level of physical evidence. I've been told that in order to have a conviction, there has to be some physical evidence. And I'm wondering, I've never seen any case where that's been true for any other communities where people have been convicted with no evidence. I have a dear friend right now serving life in prison and he's just finishing up for a crime that actually happened, but there's no evidence at all, no physical evidence. So, and now we're seeing men across the country being released from crimes that where they didn't commit them. So I would just like to, is that just a reality that the African American community has to face?
I think it's a reality we may face more often than others, and testimony is considered evidence, right? So the fact that somebody gets on the stand and they testify to certain facts is considered evidence, and the jury has got to decide ultimately, A, who do you believe, or more accurately, have they proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt in a
Specific to physical evidence.
That's right, and you don't necessarily, the physical evidence, the absence thereof, may be the reason that jurors find that there is a reasonable doubt because you do not have physical evidence, but they don't have to. And so many cases come down to he said, she said, and who the jurors ultimately believe. And depending on who's on that jury, it can make all the difference in the world, and you end up having a conviction on stuff that's just flimsy. And the real problem in that trial was all the evidence that they kept out, all the evidence that they hid, and all the tampering of the evidence, so the jurors never got to hear or see the real evidence. But the idea of there being a conviction in the absence of physical evidence happens to me quite often, or at least to the extent there is any physical evidence, it doesn't go to the question that the jury is really deciding the case on. And that comes down to this person's testimony or these people's testimony versus others who are testifying. And so it does happen. And if you end up with the type of claim that can lend itself to thoughts of bias or prejudgment, all the more so if the jurors are going to be apt to believe that you resisted arrest because the officer said so, or in the case of the Duluth lynching that took place, the statement made by the young woman that she had been gang raped, she was examined by her own doctor within days of it, and he said if she was raped by 6 men, there should have been some evidence that could be seen and observed, and there was none. And nonetheless, Max Mason was still convicted. So it does happen.
Well, you just saw the case of Curtis Flowers. Anybody familiar with Curtis Flowers? I mean, this guy had been tried 6 straight times, no physical evidence whatsoever, just testimony, and yet because of racist jury selection, ended up getting new trial after new trial, finally got exonerated and is now awaiting trial. No physical evidence, just testimonial evidence. Let's get one last one, then we're going to wrap it up. Young man in the red shirt, way in the back, you're going to have to talk loud.
Hold on one second.
Oh, we got the mic coming to you. Are you representing? Is that Howard University on your chest?
HU! Hello, my name is David Edgerton III. I am a junior political science major legal communications minor at Howard University.
All right.
And
Congratulations, on the way to law school.
thank you so much. And as an aspiring black lawyer from Minnesota in the state with the second worst gaps in terms of racial equality and all aspects of life, especially education, and in a nation where only 5% of all lawyers look like me, how are you helping create a pipeline into the legal field for future black lawyers, and how can people like myself and the people in this room help that?
Good question. You want to take that one, or should you want to start it? Yeah. So let me just tell you, we're always looking for sharp young lawyers at the Attorney General's office. I've been there a year, and about half of the people I've hired have been from communities of color, including African American communities. So we're hiring people. We have an internship program for minority students. We're fighting on the front line every day to make sure that we get that pipeline in. And I hope that you'll look at working at the Minnesota Attorney General's office maybe this summer.
Or at least get in the game. And I'm in private practice, and you see very few lawyers that look like you or me in private practice at all, much less representing Fortune 500 companies as a go-to trial lawyer. I mean, if I see 5 anywhere else around the whole country, that's it. And almost never in the courtroom do I see a lawyer at the other table who looks like me anywhere. And I try cases all over the place, from LA to Seattle, a lot more places than here.
He's pretty good at it.
So, I pull it off. And so I'm always trying to encourage, trying to inspire, trying to get young brothers like yourself kind of get your mind, even starting in high school, that it isn't just about necessarily being a star athlete, although that's cool, but how many of those really make it, right? Or if you're blessed and talented and hardworking, like Mr. Cymone, you make it as an artist way, but how many Andre Cymones are there? And so I want to...
There's just one, brother.
Right. And so I've always, whether it's going into schools, trying to identify others to come to do internships in the firm, et cetera, trying to encourage others to get out and get in the game and consider it. And if you're going to be a lawyer, there are many types of lawyers other than entertainment lawyers or sports lawyers. You don't have to be one of those. That's fine. Don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing shade on. But so much, that's what I hear kind of overwhelmingly, when there are so many different areas where we are underrepresented, that we need kind of more representation and more interest. And I'm really focusing on people, young folks, getting the fundamentals down, because there's no sense in you won't become a lawyer if you don't first succeed in high school, and then there you got to succeed in college and so on, to know that if it were easy, everybody would do it. So there's no getting around hard work, good quality, and on time. And anything other than that you know, it's just not going to count because it's a hard gig.
Hey, everybody, give it up for Trea from the Ujamaa Place, Rena Moran, Cymone, Minnesota's one and only, and Jerry Blackwell. Have a nice night. Thank you very much.
General Ellison.
And General.